And a good morning, everyone. I hope that you're all well. As you can see, technology is being used in this summit. My name is Tanya Habimana, and it's my pleasure to be your host throughout the next 2 days. On a day-to-day basis, as a means of an introduction, I anchor a show called Closing Bell on CNBC Africa. So what I normally do is speak to the financial, well, not speak to, but I cover the financial markets, I speak to CEOs, corporate executives, and I look at business and the economy and everything that touches business and the economy. But over the next couple of days, I'm going to be engaging with you. I've had the privilege and honor of engaging with SAMED on a few occasions already, and I have to say it keeps getting better and better. I've enjoyed learning about such a critical and important sector, and I'm going to enjoy learning even more over the next couple of days. It's going to be interactive, engaging, and in order to make sure that it is this way, I'm going to need your full participation and attention. So before we get started, I'd like to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us today. It's my absolute privilege and honor to actually welcome on stage Peter Mehlape, your chairperson, to give our opening remarks.
Tanya, thank you very much. Fellow board members, SAMED Secretariat, SAMED members, all esteemed guests, good morning and welcome to this great SAMED conference. Today and tomorrow, we've lined up a very interesting program. We've made sure that the program is mixed up, a combination of presentations on topics that are relevant to you, such as compliance, health technology assessment, ethics, current issues that affect the industry, and everything else that you need to know about this. And let me also thank our sponsors, without whom some of the activities were not going to happen today. Thank you very much. And please, when you do get some time during breaks, please move across and check them, the booth and all that. We actually were, when I was talking to SAMED Secretariat, Tanya and the office team to say, how can we do this year's conference different now that we're all coming out of COVID? We've been Zooming and Microsoft Teams and all kinds of apps, meeting and all that. And, we thought we'd do it, in a way that will allow people to socialize, to network, while we obviously dealing and attending to issues that impact our industry. And I hope, this venue will do just that, to make sure that we get some airtime with each other. And I think today, at the end of the day, we do have some time that is dedicated to for us to network, to reconnect again. And I know that you're not going to rush out to somewhere else because there's load shedding. Otherwise, you spend that painful 2 hours in traffic. You better spend it with us today. So once again, welcome. We've lined up really a good, packed 2 days in the most interactive way. We actually invited the minister to join this conference. Actually, he agreed to do it, but it just turned out that this date compete with the big meetings of ministers in New York, which I actually remember that I attended that meeting once upon a time, where all worldwide ministers meet to kind of deal with the issues of health around the world. And most ministers don't miss this meeting. But I believe we've got the deputy minister closing the meeting tomorrow, which is probably going to be able to share some of the visions and challenges that we can, as a sector, collaborate and continue to partner with them. When I took the role of the chair, I said that I will be focusing on 4 key priorities. One of those is obviously enhancing collaborations and partnerships, especially with SAPRA, the Minister of Health, but also with the Treasury as well, to make sure that we get paid. In fact, number 2 is one key point priority that I'm focusing on, to make sure that all our members get paid. I think we back of the envelope calculation is that government is owing us just over 2 billion. I said back of the envelope rough estimation. It could be higher. So, it's through this collaborations with the Minister of Health and Treasury that will make sure that we get that. I think the third priority that I've been working on, and Tanya has been very generous in helping us to drive that, is to try and elevate the SAMED brand, us as an industry. It was quite interesting when we had a woman in MedTech's day one time, I think up the road in Bryanston, and one lady who came out of, I think, a law or legal industry as a lawyer to say, I'm just so excited about this industry. You guys are making miracles. You're walking on water. The stuff that you do, nobody knows about it. You are very shy as a brand. Yet you make such a big impact on patients, on people's lives, on the healthcare program as a whole. But yet you don't talk about it. You're shy. So that's the third key priority, I think, that I'll be working on with the team to kind of change our personality from being introvert to extrovert. So we're going to be more kind of less shy and talking about the industry and things that we do. In fact, the same notion was confirmed about 2-3 weeks ago when I spoke at Gibbs Business School. They had a whole week marathon of health talks and things, and they invited me to speak on the tech in the medtech. And when I share some of the technologies and impact that we made, the moderator stopped and say, maybe what we need to do is just stop and have the whole session on medtech, because there's such a big impact, so much insights that we don't know about it. And I think I shared 1 or 2 examples at the time. One was a pill chem technology that I think it's able to do, the scope without being admitted in the hospital, probably at half the price, with less pain. You swallow this small capsule, the size of a vitamin pill, and voila. 8 days, it takes all the pictures of your stomach, large and big intestines, and tell the doctor what to do, what not to do, and all that. When they hear that, it's like, tell us more about what this industry is doing. So, driving that. The fourth, last but not least, is Dave. Dave has been very helpful, and partnering me on driving transformation in the industry, diversity as well, and inclusion for this industry, just to increase, the pool of the next generation leaders of this industry. And that's why you'll see on the agenda today, I think we've got yes, and I just want to also thank the members who took the challenge and adopted the yes initiative in getting the young graduates in driving this. So those are the four, I think, priorities that I'm focusing on. Happy to say that we made great progress on trying to collect the money, and such a joy in, wearing a different cap, trying to be a debt collector, other people's money. When we spoke to Nicholas Crisp about the problem at HASA a couple of weeks ago, or 2 months ago, he was very quick to say, I'll put my CFO from the Department of Health to you. And immediately they came online, we spoke about it, they brought all the CFOs of the 9 provinces who were very generous in saying, look, we just, wearing all these big caps. Actually, the people who are doing the jobs are finance managers, which will introduce them to you. And Tanya Vogt, not Tanya Habimana, was really, and is still working very hard with most of you member companies, moving from province to province to provide evidence, proof, and making sure that we're getting paid, and progress has been made there, But I think the biggest challenge is we're also going to have to change the behavior as the industry, the whole consignment stock, dumping products in hospitals without, proper paperwork. When we mention the fact that people are working with artificial limbs and all kinds of things that are not paid for, probably they're going to be paid for. The CFO, and I think Nicholas Crisp was just scared and sad and not sure if we're ever going to get the money. But we're making great progress on that. So on that, I think once more, welcome, sit back, put on your safety belt, and enjoy the time. And thank you very much, Tanya. How do you want me to transition? Okay, you want me to introduce Prof?
Yes.
So, this is, for me, a very special moment because not every day, or maybe let me put it this way, just about every day I get to, introduce and talk about people that I don't even know well. But today, I've got a special job, I think, to introduce Professor Bonang Mohale, whom I know very well. In fact, Prof, if you agree, I can happily say we kind of grew up together. He's the guy who actually recruited me in healthcare. I'm not going to read your CV because it's too long. I will do bullet points as I know them. I think at the time you were working at Logos, which is MSD today, as one of the managers. And I think Professor Mohale moved on to out of the industry to join elevator company, Otis, as I think as a regional manager, and he later became the CEO of the company, from cholesterol controlling drugs to elevators. It's quite getting to taking the fastest lift to the corner office. And then I think you moved on to South African SAA, the mighty South African SAA. And at the time, I remember talking to you, the division that you were heading up, I think, was probably with a capex or budget of about 8 billion rands. I remember talking to you about that, which, South African Airways being such a turbulent airline, I think you didn't stay long there, probably about 2 years, and then move on to Sanlam. You were the CEO of their marketing division there, moved on to at Zebo at the time, facilities management company, very interesting company at the time, based out of Randburg. I remember that too. And then even that you didn't, you stayed about 5 or 6 years, I also remember. But still connecting to healthcare, because I think one of the big facilities at the time was Ngosi Alba Lutuli, that you were managing that private public sector facility within that. And then you moved on to the mighty Shell, where you're the CEO and the chairman of the business. And, you know, I think as a personal friend, I mean, if you worked very hard at the time and pushed hard, moved the envelope politically, you know, in fracking the gas and all those things that you're working on, maybe the lights are going to be on for longer. You know, a topic for another time. And I think you move on to be the BLS CEO of Business Leadership South Africa. As you're kind of moving towards semi-retirement. I remember at the time you were wearing many caps when you were leading a Black Management Forum. And I think today you're the Chancellor at the University of Free State, amongst other things. Chairman of the big Bidvest. And also the president of BUSA. I know that you're working very close with Adrian Gore. Please send our regrets. He's not paying our members. and Professor Bonang Mohale is happily married with two daughters and a wife, Susie, Tsebi and Maneo, that I know very well. And by the way, our daughters share the same first name. So without any further ado, Professor Mohale, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Tanya, and every single solitary one of you for having braved the blackout to be here on time. It's wonderful to be introduced by a very dear friend of mine. I thought he was going to say just in one line that my very first job was as a medical rep with him at Pfizer with a P. Now they masquerade as people who make vaccines. But also, I must thank my boss, Abigail Buikutso, and Leline for giving me permission to come here and be here today. Those are the two beautiful ladies somewhere in the middle. They run our family business, which probably for more than 20 years was called Talk Medical Supplies. We've just changed the name now to Sirialong Healthcare. Colleagues, I think the value, the utility is in the questions and answers that we are going to have as we together co-craft and co-create how we are going to get ourselves out of this hole we have dug ourselves into. As we share ideas about how, if South Africa is going to work, is because business will make it work. So it breaks my heart that all our challenges, our own goals, self-inflicted harm, a country that has this much potential, actually now functioning at this level, and the delta could easily make us probably one of the top 10 countries in the world. But because of the choices we have made and the decisions we did not make, we are sitting where we are today. So I arrived here at about 7:30. There was only one gentleman sitting the last but one row. We shared coffee together, and he stuck his nose in his laptop. You could see he's trying to work from here to try and beat the 8 o'clock load shedding. But it wasn't designed to be this way. Remember, it was in 1998 when we had a white paper on energy that informed all of us that by the year 2000, we'd run out of generation capacity, therefore we'd run out of electricity. At that time, government decided to do very little, and I'm being kind when I say very little. As if that's not enough, we then decided to host the Soccer World Cup in 2010, one of only 2 countries in the world that hosted both the soccer, the cricket, and the Rugby World Cup. At that time, the Minister of Public Enterprises was Malusi Gigaba, who said to Eskom, keep the lights on at whatever cost. 2015, we then reward the couple that raped, pillaged, and robbed Transnet. Brian Molefe and Anoj Singh, they did such an amazing job of state capture that we promoted them to go and run and do the same at Eskom. So 2015, when they arrive, the national policy of this government is to procure generation capacity from independent power producers. But because their master at that time, former President Jacob Zuma, decided he's already taken money from the Russians and he was pushing us towards nuclear, they decided not to sign the independent power producers agreements. Yet it's policy of government. And nothing ever came of it. They went on to fire 4 executives within 6 months of their arriving at Eskom with a collective experience of 100 years because they refused to sign the optimum coal to the Gupta brothers. So where we are, I really mean it when I say we shouldn't have been. Now, even if we take the decision today to add more generation capacity, this load shedding is still going to be with us for at least 24 months. Because if we build a new generation capacity out of renewables, it will take us 2 years to build. If it's another coal-fired power station, it will be 10 years. Therefore, I think when we leave here, if there's anything that we've gotten out of braving the traffic in the morning, is that this is going to be with us for at least 2 years. There's nothing we can do about it. Because the decisions we should have taken, we did not. But at a time that South Africa is only a spit in the bucket, a drop in the ocean of global events that have blindsided all of us. Most of you represent multinationals. I've only ever worked for multinational companies. If a South African subsidiary of this multinational is 1% of the global turnover, it will be too much. And yet, 28 years into democracy, the first 15 we've been punching above our weight. We emerged as the rainbow nation, having fired not a single bullet to usher in this democracy, to be gifted with our first democratically elected president, Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela, who inherited a technically bankrupt country. In 5 years, quadrupled the GDP of this country, handed over seamlessly to Thabo Mbeki, having really run this entity for 3 years, and Thabo Mbeki did the last 2, did his 5 plus 5, and he continued on that upwards and forwards trajectory to go on to give us 43 consecutive quarters of positive GDP growth, albeit the GDP did that, culminating in October of 2007, when we touched 5.1 GDP growth. Ever since then, we've never come anywhere close. The last 10 years, our GDP on average is about 2 percentage points. And yet our population growth, at the very least, is 1.5%. Therefore, for us just to stand still, this economy ought to be growing at 1.5%, the same way that in population growth, every nation needs to have probably a growth of 1.8 to make sure that Tanya and I replace ourselves. If you do less than that, you know that you're becoming an aging population. 2007 came on the way to Polokwane. For the first time, we saw the introduction of money into the politics of the ANC, and we have never been the same ever since. We had a new lexicon. We had new language. We started speaking about state capture. Even a sitting president would then ask, but what is state capture? And some of us who did care sat with him to explain what is state capture. And we showed him the 4 pillars on which it stands and is based, which he knew very well, because this was all premeditated, pre-planned, and from where he was sitting, probably preordained. So when we have time, I'll probably touch on those 4 pillars of how state capture works in the question and answers, if it interests you. But I mean, look at where we are. Like I said, 28 years into democracy. I'm a member of the Committee of Chairpersons of the World Economic Forum. We've just identified the top 10 global risks. In the interest of time, let me just tell you about the 3 that are so obvious you could have worked them out yourself. Number 1, of course, is this notion of an unwarranted, unjustified, and therefore unprovoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's not a Russo-Ukraine conflict. It's an invasion. The second is the pandemic. This event that happens once every 100 years. This was our 6th epidemic. But the way we responded to it, it was like we're seeing it for the first time. Yes, you and I, because we're not 100, we're seeing it for the first time. But the way countries move forward in space and in time is they document the experiences they've gone through for posterity so that their children don't repeat the same mistakes. We repeated exactly the same mistakes of the February 1918, ended in April 1920, called the Spanish flu, even though it didn't originate from Spain, came in 4 waves, killed more people than the First World War. The second wave killed more people than the first wave. Our own pandemic is still with us. We're pretending like it's gone. We have just completed our 4th wave, and we've just responded in exactly the same way. So I want to go back to the literature, the mask, the social distancing, the self-isolation. The 4 non-pharmaceutical interventions were done in 1918. Today, we had to put a bunch of people in a room and call them the National Coronavirus Command Council, who need to come up with solutions as to how we need to respond to. So that was the second. The third, for me, is this notion of climate change, that you can taste, you can see, you can feel. Yesterday at 2 o'clock, rain started buffeting the province of KwaZulu-Natal. It's continuing today. Because we did not clean the drainage system, the stormwater drainage I'm talking about. Half of the water that happened last year during Easter repeated in floods 2.0 in May that killed 354 people. Almost the same number as was killed by the 2 weeks in July, on the 19th of July, when we embarked on this failed insurrection. Rampant looting, Had we just done that, just clear the stormwater drains, half of that water would have run as it normally does. But yet, our streets of KwaZulu-Natal were turned into raging torrents of rivers that swallowed literally homes. Had it not been for business, the billion that the president promised as the government's response to these KZN floods 2.0, as we speak today, not 1 cent has been dispensed. The water that saved their lives, the people that moved out of the churches to get back into some semblance of accommodation is as a result of business, which takes me back to what I said, that if South Africa is going to work, it's because business has decided that we're going to make it work. Because if we are going to wait for this ANC-led government, we're going to wait a long time. It will be akin to waiting for Godot, because the ANC has demonstrated to itself, not to us, that they're incapable of self-correction, that they're incapable of taking us out of this hole. In fact, one of the greatest missing link is the political will, because you see all of South Africa's problems are well known, but all the solutions are also well known and articulated. Our problem is the doing, the implementation, the execution. It was General George Patton who said, great wars are won by good execution, not great plans, because good execution will save even a mediocre plan. So that's on the global front. What is the confluence, this intersectionality between Russia and the pandemic done? And again, in the interest of time, one of the things that it is to devastate and decimate the supply chains. Typically, our goods we get from China because that's the choice we made. So an entire container is packed in China, shipload of it. It usually goes to the US of A, where there's 300 million population with an ability to pay. Then it would make its way from the US of A to here, a period that takes sometimes 90 odd days. What has happened in the 750 days of national lockdown is that this ship still leaves China, goes to the US. Because of the panic of the lack of goods and services, they empty it. Instead of it coming here, it goes back to China. Any of you that has had a motor vehicle accident, you know that some of you had to wait for a year for parts. Some of you that are driving luxury vehicles have waited for more than 6 months just to replace a tire because you hit a pothole. The second thing that it has done, it has introduced this thing called hyperinflation. One of the most single, both systemic and systematic risk is hyperinflation. This inflation is threatening to disrupt our biggest trading partner, which is the EU, used to be 28, now 27 countries, which has increased the price of energy and therefore has led to an energy crisis in Europe, prompting Ben van Beurden, the group CEO of Shell, to say this energy crisis in Europe alone is going to take us several winters. I'm not English, but the last time I checked, several means 7 or more, just like a couple means 2 or more. So I think we need to brace ourselves for a winter of discontent in the Northern Hemisphere. This was before Vladimir Putin being isolated by the deepest, quickest, most pervasive sanctions, decided to turn off the pipeline that supplies more than 25% of the energy that Europe needs, and indeed the whole EU needs. Because you see, between Russia and Ukraine, they are still responsible for 30% of the global grain market, in particular wheat. Even though Africa has 60% of the arable land, global arable land, 28 of the 55 African countries still are net importers of grain, mostly from Ukraine. Russia alone is still responsible for 25% of the global energy supply, mostly in liquid fuels, but also in gas. If you look at South Africa, for the last 10 years on average, we're consuming 30 billion liters of liquid fuels. 20 billion we make locally through the 5 refineries that used to be. If we're lucky, only one of them is still refining locally. The other 10 we import. The biggest being Sapref at 180,000 barrels per day. So we also are feeling this. When you went to the shops and found that even the price of just olive oil and sunflower oil has gone up 37% just in the first 6 months of this Russia-Ukraine conflict. Let me say a sentence just about Africa. You see, Africa, just like South Africa, is not a poor continent, just poorly managed. Because everything, every mineral that the world needs is found in this continent, not as number 22 or number 25, but as number 1 or 2. And yet when we talk about poverty, we talk about Africa. When we talk about the dark continent, we talk about Africa. Of the 1.4 billion people, out of the 7.4 billion people in the world that have absolutely no form of access to energy whatsoever, 748 million of them are found here in the continent, purely because of the choice of leadership we have made. So my one sentence to you is that Africa today is rapidly running out of food, fuel, and finance. A little bit closer to home. There are many things that keep us awake at night. In fact, I think South Africa probably has about 1,001 challenges, all of them with conflicting priorities. Again, in the interest of time, let me touch on no more than 3. So the first I've spoken about is this notion of a stable, reliable, and predictable energy supply. You see, I didn't say Eskom, because for 28 years we have been obsessed with Eskom. We should be able to take energy from whence it comes. It shouldn't matter where it comes from. It's just unfortunate that 90% of our electricity happens to come from Eskom. This entity that was created by a gentleman called Van der Bijl. We even have a town out in Vereeniging named after him, who also gave us Iskor, the steel maker. And at that time, this was an entity that produced the cheapest electricity in the world. Go back to the ads of the Department of Trade and Industry and how we used to market this country. It was premised on the lowest electricity. It was the 4th best utility in the world. It had 17,000 employees. It had a nameplate capacity of 36 gigawatt. We decided to build Medupi, Kusile, and Ingula. These last 2 were supposed to have been completed in 2014. Medupi at 36 billion. At 58 billion up until today, 9.6 gigawatt to add onto the grid. Kusile, another 9.6 gigawatt. None of them are at 50% capacity. Unit 4 of Medupi is still off as we speak, purely and simply because of state capture. So I spoke a little bit about Brian Molefe and Anoch Singh. I feel compelled just to make this example. You see, that's what happens when we make the wrong choices. So everywhere else in the world, the regulators understand that their role is probably 30% gatekeeping, 70% enabling. except here in South Africa, where the regulators think that their job is 110% gatekeeping. That's why we're not getting paid. Everywhere else in the world, when you have an order to place of more than one things, you do what human beings would do. Say if I buy 2, what discount would I get? So the UAE, when they buy aircraft, they go to Airbus and they place the order for the 7 Emirates, Dubai, Qatar, amongst others. They get a 30% discount. We had an opportunity to place 1,064 wagons just for Transnet. This was the biggest order in the world at that time. We could have gone just for Transnet and negotiated this normal 30% that gets granted when you've got both the economies of size, scale, and scope. But what did we do? We decided to place this order with China South Rail. Because you see, when you put it offshore, it is possible that 500 million can get lost and find its way into people's private accounts offshore and would not be able to trace it. And that's exactly what we did. I'm not even talking about PRASA that needed to place their own wagons, their locomotives. They created an entity called Shivambo that swallowed 3.2 billion of that. Right at the last moment, because the intention was not service delivery, they go to Spain and they order these that are already prefabricated and made, found to be too tall for a rail system. But by that time, the money is eaten. I'm not talking about all the wagons that are in the country, in this entity that we call Metro Rail. All of them were made by 2 entities. Both of them are found in Prapan. The one you know very well because we grew under, called Union Carriage. All these trains are created by Union Carriage. Had we placed it with Union Carriage, the price of Anglo-American steel entity in Germiston, just outside of London, would be 5 times. Because they would have produced beneficiated steel, Union Carriage would have made the carriages, would have absorbed 3.2 million people in new employment. But no, we didn't. On Transnet, the price went up 37%. In fact, the absolute numbers, Brian goes to the board and says, for the 1,064 locomotives, it will be 36 billion. The board puts their hands on their heads and says, why so expensive? So no, don't worry. It includes everything, including the kitchen sink. The time cost of money, but also foreign exchange. It wasn't even 13 months later. He goes back to the same board, and they put in a massive, whopping 16 billion on top of it to come to 54 billion. And the South Africans, all 60.1 million of us, didn't even bat an eyelid. And the price went up 37. So the delta for us is 67%. You see, when you steal money, eventually, it gets finished. So now, when you need it, the government is reprioritizing from one department to the other because they just don't have enough. This was demonstrated beyond any shadow of doubt when we were also hit by the pandemic. As business, we went to sit with the president and said, we need to be on the COVAX program because we don't have money to buy our own vaccines. The president had set us a herd immunity target of 67%. 67%, if you do the arithmetic, not mathematics, it's more complex. It's 40 million South Africans, which means in January when I announced it, we should have been inoculating at a rate of 100,000 a day every day. Had we done that, it would have taken us 400 days or 13.3 months, which means we were planning, agitating, and orchestrating to finish our vaccination program only in 2022. So when we stood down and retired the Disaster Management Act after 750 days of national lockdown, the people that were fully vaccinated were 30.3%. You see, we don't want to be known as a nation that set ourselves a target with the full intention of not meeting it. Who's going to take it seriously? Because we don't take ourselves seriously. We did the same thing with the NDP 2030. We had 30 years to plan. We said, here's a diagnosis, 11 things that are wrong. These are the 9 things that you need to do. We're left with 7 years. And in 7 years, every pundit, every expert tells us that we are not going to meet these targets that we set for us. By the way, we did exactly the same with the RDP. When you talk to young people today, they think the RDP is a house. They forget that it was our very first plan, Reconstruction Development Plan. I think for me, it was the best plan. Not best because it was complete, not best because it was comprehensive, best because government had signed off on it, business signed off on it, labor signed off on it, and civil society did. All we had to do was implement. 3 years into it, we decided to put it aside because we suffer from this phobia of what else is new, what can we announce. We introduced a new plan called Growth, Employment, and Redistribution, GEAR, because we said, no, the macroeconomics in RDP are not well articulated. Let's come with something that sounds clever. We introduced GEAR. When Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka became our president for a short while, she introduced ASGISA. And then it was the 9-point plan. Today we are talking about the employment, reconstruction, and redistribution program. Again, with no intention of meeting its objectives, the same way that we didn't meet our vaccination program. But the reason why we achieved 30.3 is because as business, we sat with government and said, we're going to have timelines, milestones. We're going to introduce this notion of final accountability. We're going to meet weekly with you, Mr. President. We're going to do the math and see how we can cover most of our people. And what we presented to him was so easy, even I understood it. You see, we used to be the #1 gold-producing country in the world. Now we're not even in the top 10. We used to employ 900,000 people in our mining industry. Today we employ 400,000. So we said, if you give Roger Baxter 400,000 of these, Roger can ensure that the 400,000 in mining get vaccinated. Because remember, when we national lockdown, miners were the only one that were allowed to work with all the non-pharmaceutical protocols be observed. We said if you give it to Imperial, they've got 145,000 employees. They can do that. If you give it to Adrian Gore of Discovery, who you have an issue with, he's my deputy president at Business Unity South Africa. So I've taken notes before I came here to talk to him, because at the moment they are strangling not just this industry, but this entire economy, because they've borrowed too much in taking Vitality Global, but also in starting a bank. That's a lot of money. So now they want their returns, and what do? The only thing that they've got within the locus of control is operation expenditure. So they're trying to reduce their expenditure. So we sat with the president weekly and said, we're going to communicate to the country every day as to how many of our people are infected and affected, and God forbid, those that are dead. So that when they wake up in the morning, it's here. When they go to bed every night, it's here. So that all of us can see that this thing is real, to address both the issue of the non-vaxxers, the hesitancy, but also the effectiveness and efficiency. Had we not done that, we know that a lot more of our people would have perished. So it is that on the 28th of January, we met with the president as Busa and said, Mr. President, we realize that you are preoccupied with whatever. It's an elective year in December. You'll be seeking the second term from the ANC. Then the next day is 2024. Instead of thinking about service delivery, you'll be thinking about how do you maintain the leadership of the ANC. If they get below 50%, I think they will celebrate. Because all the polls say 42% and less. We have on average 7 service delivery protests a day, every day. Our people are so disappointed, so angry, that if they were to vote back the ANC into power, then they are the ones that need some intervention, not your patience. And meeting with him, we said, we will pick the things that we are going to do as business, with or without your support. Better with your support, but we're going to go ahead anyway. So we said, here's a list of 10 in one page. We'll discuss with you only 5. He looked at his time and said, no, but we've got 3 hours. Why don't you make it 6? So we shared with him those 6 things. And again, in the question and answers, if you're interested, I'll probably touch on all those 6 that we said we're going to do as business without needing government's permission. Colleagues, let me just end on, but you see, business itself has a lot to answer for. The Zondo Commission report, number 1, 874 pages, that came in 3 volumes. That took 4 years, 400 days sitting at a cost of R1 billion, called some of our colleagues by name. And we know that there are some of us who have abetted and aided state capture, because not all of us are angels. So I think a serious intervention is needed to steer business back so that we can regain our voice, regain our integrity, our reputation, and our credibility. Because you see, it is incongruent to speak of a just society when business itself is seen to be at the apex of injustice. What is needed now is incisive, bold leadership, which only business can provide. So as we sit here and I take questions and comments from you, remember that how does it manifest? How we as businesses acquiesced in getting ourselves into a hole. We're sitting at a place where we say inequality has widened. Racism is at an all-time high. Public education has collapsed. Public health care continue to fail the poor and the vulnerable. Crucial infrastructure is laying barren. And lawlessness has become an epidemic. Tanya, do I have time to take a question or 2?
You do,
or must
absolutely.
I sit down and shut up?
No. We'll take some questions. You're welcome to send your questions through on the app. We'll be displaying them on the screen. Yes, Peter.
If I was the boss, I would say you are number 1 and look at others, because he just spoke so that you give other people a chance. That's what I would have done. But I'm not the boss.
Okay.
Prof. Mohale, thank you so much for inspiring presentation of things as you see them.
Amandla.
My question to you is, our members, most of them are distributors, family-owned businesses, maybe just like yourself. You spoke about a family business, and most of the multinationals in the room, we bring products in dollars, euros, and then sell them in rents. And my question to me is, 2 months ago, the rand was 15 to 1 to $1. Today, 17 point something to $1. Where to now? Is it going to 30 to 1, 25 to 1? Where are we going with this?
Sure, such a difficult question. So nobody has a crystal ball, but if you look at all the matrices, they tell us a story. Look at Europe, for instance. Because of this hyperinflation as a global threat, they are now increasing interest rates, which increases the cost of borrowing for governments, for businesses, but also for you and I. Our inflation is about 7.5%. The Fed has increased. This will be the 7th time. All of them have increased by a minimum of 1 percentage point. That's 100 basis points. So I think for us, we can expect that on Thursday, we'll see a rate hike. Before the end of the year, there'll be another rate hike. So the repo rate was 3.5, it will go to 4, maybe it will go to 5. You'll pay more for your bond, for your car, but for any other debt. So I think, if anything, let's continue to tighten our belts until we see where this thing is going. Because the energy crisis in Europe and where we are as a people has no solution for tomorrow. Let me end on, I started with electricity.
Yes.
So each time we reach stage 4, we lose 2 billion rands. A day, not a year. Between stages, it's 500 million rands. So at stage 6, that's more than 3 billion. But it wipes off an entire 1 percentage point from our GDP in a year. So our growth for the last 10 years, I said, has been less than 2 percentage points. So you take 1 point because of electricity. If you run a mine and you are told that we're in stage 6, the people come to work, you don't take them down the hole because you don't know when you will be able to bring them up. So that day's production is just lost. Our production used to be 1,000 tons of gold a day, every day. Today we produce 400,000 a day on average, even on coal. I mean, our coal used to go to Europe. We missed the first boom when China needed this coal. They got it from Mexico. They're still getting it from Mexico to show that if you're not there when the market needs you, the market makes a play. The same way that Russia sanctions, what Vladimir Putin has done is to reduce Russia from being a superpower to being a country like Pakistan, and yet with nuclear power. Let me take the second question.
Thank you. Lady over here.
Prof, thank you very much for your very thought-provoking session. My question to you is, if you were presenting the very same session in front of the final year business school students, we know what we've done wrong. We know the mistakes that we've kind of done over and over again for the past couple of generations. What would be your advice to the next generation of leaders in this country?
Sure. So first of all, I would do what Lenin said, what's to be done. I think in South Africa, number one will be to say address youth unemployment. At 74.9%, not only are we asking for trouble, we are actively inviting it. When young people of military age are sitting at home twiddling their thumbs, you're asking for trouble. If you don't address that, the 2 weeks in July is going to happen again and again and again. The second thing that I would say we'll do is stop load shedding first. It's destroying this economy. Number 3, I would say let's reduce our government debt. Because 2010, it was 74% debt to GDP ratio. 4 years ago, 89%. Today, when you include guarantees to the more than 740 state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies, it's 110%. It's not the percentage in and of itself, but it's because we are broke. Therefore, you need to reduce that government debt. So before the pandemic, we were borrowing at a rate of 2.1 billion a day, every day. The Minister of Finance, Ino Godongwana, says in the first 6 months of this year, we've already borrowed 1.8 trillion South African rands. We are indebting the next generation. This is important because it's not so much that we inherited this earth from our forebears as much as we borrowed it from our children. Therefore, it behooves us to leave it in a state that is substantially better than we found it in. Every parent, you want to fight your own wars so that you create space for your children to fight their own wars. When your children come to complete the wars you should have fought, you have not really succeeded. The fourth will be, say, reduce the public sector wage bill. Edward Kitzvetter collects on average 1.4 trillion a year, every year, from business and you and I. That's how much we stole in the first 5 years of state capture. That's 2/3 of what he collects. 9 wasted years, 200 billion, just to the 2 Zupta families. But 70% of the 1.4 trillion that he collects goes to 3 buckets. Number 1, it pays government wages. Number 2, to social security. I'll come back to that. 3, it's interest, just to service this loan, at 20%. That's where we're at the moment. So let me say a little bit about social grants. The math doesn't add up. Before the pandemic, 16.5 million people were gainfully employed in the private sector, 1.3 million in the public sector, and yet 17 million people were on social security. Fewer people are supporting people who are on grants. Then, as a result of the pandemic, the president introduces the social relief of distress grant, 350 rand a month. I mean, what can you do with 350 rand a day, a month? 14 million people apply, 10 million get given. That's 27 million people who are now on social security. So technically, we are a nation of social grant recipients, not of producers. We are a nation of consumers. So 70% of this, gone. 30% to invest in infrastructure. That's why our savings rate is the lowest in the BRICS country. Because technically, people can save. Because when you add transport, your salary is gone. Do I have time to take one more?
We've got 2 more already. We've got the gentleman here and the lady over here.
Thank you very much, Prof, for a very insightful and intriguing discussion. I was much more keen on trying to get your insight as far as the way business, together with the government, actually during the pandemic, tried to address certain issues, where you said that business said to the president or the politicians that this is what needs to be done, we're going to do it whether you like it or not. And then at the same time, you spoke about the delta that could actually leapfrog, if it was handled properly, that could leapfrog the country's GDP to be amongst the top 10. My question to you is that why shouldn't business do the same approach that it did during the pandemic to unlock this part of the delta in order to actually leapfrog the economy to get us at least somewhere out of this kind of situation that we have? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So what I didn't add in responding to this question, I stopped at 3-4 things that we needed to do. So it's a nice segue to what we can do as business. So I said this old ESCOM had 17,000 employees. Before 2010, during Jacob Zuma's tenure, that number jumped up to 48,000. Today, as we speak, ESCOM has 47,776 employees. 13,000 too much. So reducing the public sector wage needs to be led by these more than 740 state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies so that they are right-sized. And yet our electricity is 4% less. We're collecting 17% less, and yet we have, over the last 10 years, you and I paid on average 30% more for electricity. So you pay more, and they're asking for 32% now, for electricity that you actually don't have. So what we did in speaking to the president as our commitment as business, with without him, let me start first with a challenge to all of us.
Is my mic on?
And then I'll tell you what we said, the 6 things. One is we don't need government's permission to pay small and medium enterprises in 30 days. We don't. We can make that decision today. At Busa, we're beginning to measure those that are paying in 7 days. Because to SMEs, cash flow is the lifeblood of that business. Without cash flow, they're dead. What you lose in interest for that month, you get more than double in BE points. If you're level 1, then you can charge up to 35% more, all things being equal. You don't need government's permission to address issues of gender equality and pay parity. It can be that in the 21st century, we pay women 75% of what we pay men for work of equal value. You see, it's apples for apples. You don't need government's permission to do that. The CEO goes to the office on Monday and says, print me a spreadsheet to see how we pay women in relation to what we pay men, and then you put a plan in place, even if it takes you 100 years to close that delta. We don't need government's permission to address issues of transformation so that this economy is broadly reflective of the demographics. Women are 51% of the 60.1 million South Africans. Their representation in positions of leadership is no more than 24%. African women, 4%. That's not sustainable. The pandemic taught us that of the 8 countries that dealt better with the pandemic are those that have women as head of state than those that have men as head of state, including New Zealand and its 5 million inhabitants, Germany's Angela Merkel, etc. So the requisite skills of the 21st century in business, we know, are found in women. They don't or can naturally in men, even though we've been pretending to be CEOs for the last 375 years. We don't need government's permission to make sure that our businesses execute on this thing called DEI. We used to call it diversity and inclusion. Now we call it diversity, equality, and inclusion. Because for me, diversity is being invited to a party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. But belonging is being allowed to bring your own music and playing it. Feeling needed and wanted. Free to speak my mind. So that is within your and my locus of control. Not this ANC-led government. So what did we say to the president? Number one, we said, Mr. President, we want to invest for growth, not for consumption. I'm not unpacking it. Number two, we said, we want to invest in infrastructure, because that's what drives the GDP growth. Number three, we said we wanted to invest in network industries, ports, harbors, but also in digital migration and 5G spectrum. The last three, we said we support all the recommendations of the Zondo Commission. We'll put money aside so that you go after those businesses that have been named. The NPA is hollowed out deliberately, purposefully, consciously. When you go to law school, if you do 6 months of commercial law, it's too much. Therefore, the reason why Marcus Jooste of Steinhoff is still working free is because you don't have enough skilled people with commercial law to put together a prosecutable case that can send him to jail. Those skills are not there. So we said, Mr. President, whether you need 1 or 2 experienced lawyers with commercial law or 400, we'll give you for free. Because remember, that's what we did during the pandemic, which is your question. The pandemic, what we did, 100 companies gave off their services free. 400 individuals gave off their services free. That's why we could meet weekly, every week. That's what we did with the president. The last 2, we said we will invest in a capable state, because the non-wasted years have demonstrated beyond any shadow of doubt that it's better to deal with a capable state than the one that's less capable. I mean, we used to have ministers, when you say, but the rand has dropped, to say, Mali wele rand, sizawuxosha. The last one we said, law and order, safety and security, because without law and order, Who are we and what are we? On Monday, an article appears in Daily Maverick that says, of the graduates, 53% of them are planning to immigrate. Why are we surprised? I mean, we have the world records for all the wrong reasons. The most unequal society in the world. Highest unemployment rate in the world, 46.6%. They say with an expanded definition. That's real, because in 2 years, expanded definition means you exclude those that in the last 2 years have not been looking for work. Who could look for work in 750 days? Mm-hmm. This unemployment is worse than countries at war. Afghanistan, worse. But also the highest SME failure rate in the world. The country with the highest GBV case in the world. That's men killing women. Not by a factor of 2, 5 times the global average. You can see we are sick. Last one, we second only to Russia in terms of suicide rate. So when young people don't feel free, I mean, on Wednesday I went to Meyersdal Eco Estate. Naomi Disana's daughter calls from Germany. She's been there for 2 years. Says, Mom, I'm walking at the park and I'm calling you on my phone. If you think I'm coming back, you're going to have to wait a long time. Says, I couldn't do this at Rhodes twice. During the day, midday, I was talking to you on my phone. Somebody didn't snatch it and run. They took it, looked me in the eye, and walked away slowly, twice. Here, I feel free. Can I go down now?
I just want to honor the last question. The lady's been waiting.
You're too kind.
Yes.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you, Prof. It's been an amazing session. Amanda from Umsinzi Healthcare. On Monday, applications for 44 positions closed for the National Department of Health, and this is the Technical Skills Incubator Unit for National Health Insurance. And coming from UK and a National Health Service, which, much as it's not as good as it was 15 years ago when I left, I still love it dearly. I would love to know your advice to Nicholas Crisp, because Solidarity have already lodged a legal letter of complaint in terms of, and I'm very mindful of your comments about ESCOM, that we missed an amazing opportunity to put together a technical capability in other power sources. So are we going to miss the opportunity again in terms of NHI? I appreciate it's not yet approved by Parliament, but there are a number of things you can get on with from a skills perspective and actually get them set up. So what are your feelings on that, and what advice would you give to Dr. Crisp?
She's supposed to close with an easy question.
Right?
Didn't you brief
But
her?
I'm sure you can handle it, Professor.
So there are 3 things that currently are hot. One of them is basic income grant, which government wants to introduce even though they don't have money. Number 2 is a social compact. Social compact, it says, what are we prepared to give up as business, as labor, as government? So to government, you say, stop state capture, stop cadre deployment, provide basic service, and then we'll come to the party. And national health insurance. As business strategically, we need to say we support NHI. Because to say we don't support it, it will look like we are inhuman. Because NHI is about universal access. It's about affordability. Mm-hmm. See, a good plan, if you are a CEO, it's an acceptable plan, that's credible, that's competitive. So on paper, maybe it might tick 1 or 2 of those. The problem is, when this government, in 15 years, couldn't fix the rolling blackouts, that started in February 2008. What confidence are they giving themselves? So I served on the Commission of Inquiry into National Health Insurance when Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma was our first Minister of Health, with Bada Parasi, Malibona Precious Matsoso. They were in the old Medicines Control Council. We produced a credible plan. They looked at it, the ANC, they put it in file 13. This was more than 28 years ago. Now they whip it up, because they're thinking of 2024 elections, so that what else can we say we have done for the people? There is no political will. So I think, in the interest of time, let's say we support NHI, but we must run it as the private sector. Because you see, as the private sector, only we understand this notion called project management. How to deliver mega projects on time, on full, and in budget. Governments all over, they fail with it. This government has demonstrated they can't do it. The new multi-product pipeline, budgeted at 7.2 billion. 4 years late, 20 billion delivered. Midupe, the same thing. Kusile, the same. Ingula, hydroelectric power, exactly the same thing. Not only because of stealing, because they just don't have the skills. So I said we must reduce the public sector wage bill. But yet we have high vacancies of police people and people in healthcare, medical doctors, clinicians, but also nurses. But we've got more people in the wrong jobs. But as I end, but you can see that we don't even take ourselves seriously as a people with great natural endowments. When I was growing up, pass mark was 51%. Because we didn't want to be at 50 just in case they give you 49.9%. Since when did 30 become an acceptable mark? Because you see, education matters for a number of reasons. Because it's the only way that you can transcend social classes. Born in Alexander, in an informal settlement. After 25 years of hard work, application, you can afford a house in the leafy suburbs of Branston. Not because you want a tender, but because you've earned it, you deserve it, and you can afford it. Because you see, when one steadily burns the midnight oil, one gains access to the domain of knowledge and wisdom, the world of meaning, the world that cannot be conquered without a persistent crusade. I love education because when you are educated, you make it impossible to be tricked by politicians.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor Bonang Mohale. That was fantastic. Thank you.